Welcome everyone. I declare this meeting of the Port Phillip City Council open, and I welcome the members of the public who are brave the cold and are here tonight. Thanks and well done. The City of Port Phillip respectfully acknowledges the Yalukit Willem clan of the Boonwurrung. We pay our respects to their elders, both past and present. We acknowledge and uphold their continuing relationship to this land. So Council has a law which determines how this meeting is going to be run. There is a time allotted in tonight's agenda for public question time. There's also which is the first opportunity for members of the community to address us, but that's all about asking questions. The second is that members of the public are entitled to ask a question or make a comment on a specific item in tonight's agenda. This will be done prior to Council considering the agenda. If you wish to ask a question or speak to a report, please complete the blue form that we have that are available at the table just outside the chamber and hand it to a staff member. And I encourage you to limit your questions or comments to 3 minutes. Please note that the council meetings are now being live streamed. Please also note that in accordance with Council's local law that this meeting cannot be filmed or recorded unless permission is granted by the Mayor. And in the unlikely event of an emergency evacuation, please follow the instructions of the Chief Warden, Kirsty. So, Kirsty just left the room, which is a bit ominous in case we have an emergency in the next 10 seconds. Agenda item 1, apologies. Councillors, we clearly have no apologies. 2, minutes of the previous meeting. Councillors, the minutes of the ordinary council meeting held on 15 May 2019 and of the special meeting of council held on 29 May 2019 have been circulated. Are there any questions regarding these minutes? If not, can I have a motion to confirm these minutes? Move Councillor Voss, seconded Councillor Bond. I'll now put the motion. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Declarations of conflicts of interest. Does anyone have a conflict of interest in a matter being discussed at tonight's agenda? There are none. 4, petitions and joint letters. Councillors, we have 2 petitions tonight. Item 4.1, petition regarding parking and street access affected by the Melbourne Grand Prix. Councillors, we've received no request from the members of the public to speak to this item. Councillors, are there any questions? Councillors, we have an officer's recommendation. Would someone like to move this or something different? Move Councillor Baxter, seconded Councillor Voss. Thank you very much. Do you wish to speak to those? I'll move to the vote. All those in favour? That's once again unanimous. Item 4.2, we have another petition requesting lighting at Lagoon Reserve, Port Melbourne, and we have several speakers. Could I ask Amanda Noble to just sit in that seat there, please, Ms. Noble? Could you state your name and suburb for the record and press the middle button which should light up the red ring?
Good evening and thank you for having me speak today. It's Amanda Noble and my suburb is Port Melbourne, right beside Lagoon Reserve. There we go, much better. The reason I attended today is I wasn't a signature to the petition. The petition was asking for lighting to be, as I understand it, was asking for lighting to be placed on using existing lighting that was there. I live in I'm lucky enough to live in one of the penthouses beside the park. For those of you who don't use it, there's up to, I've counted 87 dogs one evening in that park, and about 87 on one evening I counted. And I have the photos if you'd like it. But there's no adequate lighting for the dog walkers. Some of the dog walkers are disabled. and it's just, compared to some of the other dog parks around the place, it really is underdone. I didn't sign this petition specifically because I wanted a more permanent solution than just to have some lights that are existing there that are really for training for soccer and cricket players, to have those switched on. Instead, I'd like something more permanent along at least the boundaries of the park. In addition to that, the dogs have no watering facilities that actually work. There's better watering facilities in virtually every other park in the area that has, and I'm talking Elsternwick and things as well, that has a large number of dogs than we have there. And it would really be good if something could be done sometime soon. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I rode here through it and there was a lot of doggies, but not 87. It was. Stephen Blair. Hi, Steve.
Evening, councillors and mayor. I don't want to make a habit of this 2 nights in a row. I don't know how you all keep this up. Yes, look, really, I was just effectively the coordinator of this. I was, as you know, sort of instrumental with Bernadine's help and others getting some catch-up maintenance done on the oval. And it just seemed to me that it seemed a real pity not to be able to utilise that oval a little bit better during the winter, because 87 dogs, we were counting regularly 50-odd dogs a night and probably 20 or 30 in the morning and another 30 during the day. So I'd reckon there's probably more than 100 individual dogs if you take out duplicate and triplicate visits to the oval. So I just thought it was a bit of a pity not to utilise that better space pending the redevelopment, Mr Mayor. We spoke to Adi Harsinovic at the soccer club and they were amenable to using their training lights in the interim, and it is an interim solution, and we're probably here effectively asking for permission or asking for forgiveness rather than for permission, because it's happening, and when you rode through tonight it would have been on as well, I'm assuming. So the petition was done over 4 days. We didn't have to try very hard to get those signatures, and I'd support Amanda's comments really as well, and I don't want to be necessarily the face of all this stuff in relation to Lagoon Oval, but it's just a sensible course of action as far as I can see.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Stephen. Kerry McKendrick.
Sorry, is it green light? Yeah. Good evening, Kerry McKendrick, 4th generation Port Melbourne resident. Community activist, probably, and it's been a long time since I've sat in these chambers as the last elected councillor to the City of Port Melbourne.
Yes.
So my signature will be in a couple of those drawers, or the graffiti of my signature will be in those drawers.
We'll find
and thank
it
you for listening and allowing us to present this petition tonight. The theory behind the petition was more for a more permanent solution for Lagoon Oval. I'll give you some history around Lagoon Oval. So the area that bounds Lagoon Oval, where the Park Apartments currently is, there was a roadway through that reserve, and that was basically an unkept roadway. It was just basically gravel. So when the apartments were built, they did put in vegetation. And I assume that when the vegetation was planted, there was probably adequate street lighting from a safety perspective. And since we're now looking at post 20 years, the canopies of the trees have grown over, and it's actually a very dark, unsafe environment for most people passing through the park. The park is also adjacent to the family care centre, and a lot of parents commuting to and from the city, collecting their children from the daycare centre, also use the park to take their children home of an evening. So approximately there is 8 entry points into the park, and they're all controlled entries because the park does have a railed area around it. So you are guided through particular areas, and these are very dark and unsafe areas to walk through. So really the petition was to bring to Council's attention that we are utilising the lights at the moment. We are hoping that they are a very short-term interim position, and we are hoping that Council will see basically the safety of the residents, the visitors and everyone all about, including the dog walkers, as Amanda stated, there was 87 one evening, and put in a more permanent, safe solution for everyone that uses the park. And with the incidents that have happened in Melbourne in the last 12 months, with 4 women being killed in basically public reserves, we don't want Port Melbourne to be one of those reserves where this happens. So there is some urgency attached, because the entry points from Layarda Street into the reserve and 2 entry points from Graham Street into the reserve are very dark and unsafe for anyone entering the reserve. We would also like if Council could allow the lights to potentially be on until 9 o'clock and a more permanent arrangement on a timer, because Stephen, my partner, actually physically goes into the club rooms every night at about sunset and turns the lights on a 3-hour cycle. We know the lights were upgraded last week and the timer wasn't adjusted, so we're still physically having to go and turn those lights on, and that they are on for a 3-hour cycle. So we would like that cycle extended from maybe 5 p.m. till 9 p.m. We did have other speakers aligned for tonight, but unfortunately those speakers were still stuck in the office and they still need to go home and walk their dogs. So 9 o'clock would be great, and it would not impede too much on the residents in the park apartments as well.
Great, thanks very much, Kerry. If you can wait just a second, I think there's going to be a question. Councillor Voss.
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks for coming, Kerry. I noticed that the lights had been upgraded as well. Do you know why they were upgraded?
They're upgraded on a request from the soccer club, so we're really quite thankful that the soccer club have allowed us to use them. But yes, Stephen still has to physically go in and turn them on. Okay. And when he wasn't in Melbourne last week, it was very difficult. There was 2 nights when the lights weren't able to be turned on.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much, Kerry.
Okay, thank you.
Councillors, questions? Councillor Voss.
Thank you. I'd just like to ask a question. Are the lights included in the park upgrade that we might be considering as part of the budget?
Through you, Mr Mayor, they can be included into the project scope if that's something that Council wanted to do.
Councillor Simic.
Thank you. So I can see an officer recommendation, but could you, for the benefit of the people here tonight, outline the next steps with the petition that's been provided to us tonight, if the officer's recommendation is adopted?
Good question.
Through you, Mr Mayor, I actually don't have the officer's recommendation. Oh, thank you. To receive it, thank you. So the process for here would be, I guess there's 2 components to the petition. So the first component was around looking at a long-term solution. So that will be considered as part of the council's budget process. So which is coming back to council on the 19th of June. The second part of it was the temporary arrangements can be made in terms of the current one, and that's something that officers will investigate and report back to council at a council meeting, and will also engage with the petitioners as well.
Councillors, if we've got no further questions, could I have a motion, either the officer's recommendation, moved, I think the first hand was Councillor Simic and the second was Councillor Voss. Sorry, Councillor Copsey. Councillor Simic, do you wish to say something?
Thank you to everyone who's come tonight and your passion in this issue. It is something that we've heard you tonight, and we've read the petition, and we look forward to working with officers on a solution, a temporary and a permanent solution for the issues you've put to us.
Councillor Voss.
Thank you. I'd also like to thank Commander Stephen and Kerry and all the others that have contributed to this petition. It is the closest park to me as well, where I live, and I walk my dogs very regularly there in the dark, both in the early morning and the evening, so I know how dark it is, and I have to attest to this petition that it does need some additional lighting there. The lighting that is there at the moment is really not appropriate, because it spills into one's particular place, so that any sport or any training that's done really just wears out one area. So it needs to be upgraded and to consider the whole oval, so it doesn't overuse one area. Also, I think that the lighting needs to be along the path. It's a very heavily used park and it's completely dark except for one little light on the entrance of Liardet Street. So with considering the lighting strategy, I would urge the officers to actually look at not just the users of the oval but the people passing through there as well, to make sure that it's safe and that the trees, when it rains, they droop down and so you get whacked in the head when you walk past. So just want to say I think this is a great idea and I'd love for it to be considered as part of the budget going forward. Thank you.
I might just add the observation that every community asset needs champions, and this particular asset with Lagoon Reserve has the most loyal champions that one could ever hope for. I'll move to the vote now. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Thanks very much. Agenda item 5 is sealing schedule. Councillors, there are no documents that require sealing. I now have to break into the meeting. We have 2 condolence motions and the presentation of award. So prior to public question time, pursuant to Council's meeting procedure local law, the CEO has requested, and I have given consent to, the adding of 3 agenda items to the meeting tonight, being 2 condolence motions and the presentation of an award. Councillors, the first additional agenda item tonight is in recognition of the passing of Alfred Roger Bodnar. Councillors, Roger Bodnar was a former councillor of the City of South Melbourne, of the former City of South Melbourne, who passed away on 15th of May this year. Roger served on the South Melbourne Council for 20 years, from 1974 to 1994. He was a mayor for 2 terms, from 1987 to 1989. He was known as an advocate for disadvantaged members of the community, including supporting social housing in South Melbourne. And that was a time of glorious investment in social housing in South Melbourne. He served on the inaugural Gasworks Community Liaison Committee during the late 1980s, as that site transitioned to a community arts precinct, which it remains today. Once again, an amazing asset to which he contributed. The flag at the South Melbourne Town Hall was flown at half-mast on 23 May in his honour. At the end of that day, the flag was lowered and folded, and the flag has now been given to the family as a mark of respect. It is appropriate that a condolence motion be moved. Councillors, we have proposed a condolence motion, and would someone like to move this? It's up there on the rather inadequate screen, but essentially it is that Council expresses its deep regret on the passing of Roger Bodnar, offers its sincere condolences to the family, places on record its appreciation for his distinguished service to local government and in particular the former City of South Melbourne Council and the community that he served. Moved Councillor Pearl, seconded Councillor Brad. Do you wish to say anything, David? Yeah.
I didn't know him personally, but I think that the tradition of South Melbourne in particular in social welfare and social housing is an amazing history, and anybody that's been associated with it in such a substantial sort of way is a very important person in the history of this city. And so I'm very pleased to be seconding this particular motion.
Great. And Gasworks is a permanent legacy. Any further speakers? Councillor Voss?
Thank you, Mayor. I didn't know him either, But I did post the fact that he passed on the South Melbourne Born and Bred Facebook page, and there were a lot of people that came out and were very regretful of his passing and were appreciative of his deep commitment and what he did for the South Melbourne and Albert Park and Mill Park community. And I know it says in here that he's also a very well-loved pharmacist, and that was his principal business. So, yes, I can attest that Marilyn and Roger's family, will be missed.
Thanks very much. Councillors, I will now move to the vote. All those in favour? That is indeed unanimous. Councillors, unfortunately we have a rather distressing condolence motion. The recognition of the death of Emma McMillan, 6th of June. Yeah. Councillors, Emma McMillan was an employee of the City of Port Phillip and passed away on the 6th of June. 5th of June. This.
Correct, Ms. King.
This morning. Emma has worked in children's services at Port Phillip her entire working life. Emma commenced as a work experience student at the age of 16, then worked at the St Kilda North Children's Centre and then at Bub Up Nam. Her work colleagues describe Emma as the heart of Bub Up Nam. Emma's mother, Marlene McMillan, worked in children's services for many years at Port Phillip until her retirement. People may know Emma's brother, Simon McMillan, who basically introduced me to planning and also worked at Port Phillip for many years and is currently the CEO of the City of Banyule. So she was taken at a very early age, and it's appropriate that a condolence motion be moved. Councillors, we have a proposed condolence motion which is up on the board. The Council expresses its deep regret at the passing of Emma McMillan and offers its sincere condolences to her family and her children's services work colleagues. Do I have a mover? I'll take Councillor Baxter and Councillor Crawford. So thanks very much for moving and seconding that. Councillors, do we have any speeches? I might just say this is a shocker. She was very young. Her whole family have contributed mightily to this council and this city, and it's terrible. And I think this condolence motion is absolutely appropriate. Councillor Simic?
Just very briefly, Mayor, I don't know and did not know Ms McMillan personally, but my son attends at Bub Up Nam, and having dropped him off today and seen him throughout the day and the staff at Bub Up Nam, I can see and saw that staff were incredibly moved by her passing, and that she was a really integral member of the staff there, and that she will be sorely missed. It's a far too young an age to go, and I really pay my respects to her family on what must be a terribly sad time.
So I'll put the motion. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Thanks very much, councillors. The third additional item relates to a presentation of an award. Now, normally we have, I feel like we're going to have a bit of a muted presentation of the award. We usually have a ritual where some poor officer gives me the award and I act like an idiot. But I'll just take it in a more muted way. So, Mr. CEO, I think you have...
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, I wish to advise the Council has recently received an Engineering Excellence Award for environmental sustainability for its Kirrip Park development, and I'll ask Fiona Blair, Ms Blair, to say a few words and present the award to you, Mayor.
Through you, Mr Mayor, the award was from the Public Works Engineering Australia, and as the CEO said, it was in recognition of excellence in environmental sustainability design and the implementation of the project in regards to environmental considerations. So Kirrip Park required the demolition and remediation of the existing factory site at 24 Buckhurst Street and subsequent development of the 8,750 metre Kirrip Park. The project was specifically commended for its significant contribution to the available public space within the precinct, maximising water-sensitive urban design in the park, resolving key requirements of the EPA in relation to soil remediation and soil quality, groundwater management and canopy cover and air quality. And it's obviously a significant park in the area and has been very well received. Probably just like to, a number of staff in the organisation were extensively involved in this project, but probably two key staff I'd just like to acknowledge is Anthony Trail, who's the manager of our Parks and Open Space area, and Andrew Farrell, who was the project manager, who did an exceptional job managing what was at times a very complex construction project.
I think these awards are very important, and they fill my rather ample breast with pride. Public question time. Councillors, we have three people who have requested to ask a question tonight. I'll take these requests in the order in which they were received. Johnny Webster.
John Webster, St Kilda branch for the Liberal Party. I want to ask a question I asked about 18 months ago regarding the situation in Balaclava where there's public seating outside the ATM of the Commonwealth Bank and anti-sociable types congregate there in sometimes an intimidating manner, especially for women using the ATM late at night, and asking whether the council will remove that seat.
Thanks very much, Mr Webster. Sorry? I'll ask Mr CEO.
Through you, Mr Mayor, we've got no plans that I'm aware of to remove the seat. Public seating is a very important amenity. Council works very closely with local social service providers and the police to assist people who are vulnerable on that street, but also if there is criminal behaviour to make sure the police are well connected. So there are no plans to move that seat at the moment.
People are open to intimidation all the time.
Sorry, this is a question time only, Mr Webster.
Thank you.
Thank you. Gary Willis? Huh? Yeah, you did. Hi.
I'm here in support of the page reserve.
Sorry, could I just ask you to read your name into
the...
Oh, yes,
sorry. Gary Willis, Montague.
Montague?
Montague, yes, yeah. Last council meeting we put a petition to support the sort of reconsideration of Page Reserve, Smith Reserve and Heath's Reserve, I think it is. On the bottom, just water. So since then we've had rain. The drought's almost, not quite, but maybe broken, and hallelujah. But it's really the trees that are our concern. And I don't know what's being done about those, but that's the heart of the concern. So Yes, so that is the question. What might be, when, well, I believe it's not on the agenda tonight, but I'm just thinking when might that be raised with the council? We were led to believe that it was going to be raised tonight. So,
good question. I think, Ms. Blair, we might have to take that on notice, Gary, but it's about the trees in the lineal. Yeah.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, officers have been reviewing the petition and looking at the irrigation program for next year. And there is also an opportunity as council finalises the final budget process, whether there's an opportunity for council to consider some additional irrigation. So officers are still doing work on it, but I'll make sure the officers contact the petitioner so that we can make sure that you turn up when it is coming to the council meeting.
Great.
Okay.
Thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. Cheers.
Elizabeth Rocker. Welcome.
Thank you. Hello.
Hi. Could I ask you to read your name into the tape and suburb?
I'm Elizabeth Rocker and I live in Albert Park. And it's dog park night, I think. I didn't know I was coming here until a couple of hours ago, so apologies.
It's always a shock.
If it's a bit clunky. And I'll try and be quick. I'll try and give you the cake, not the recipe. But
this is mainly about questions, so we take a bit of preamble, but...
I'll try and be fast. Basically, there's a park that's fenced on the corner of Eastern Road and Park Street in South Melbourne. And I understand it needs maintenance, but about 10 days ago we found out that it was going to be closed for 3 months. And while I understand the park needs maintenance, we would really like it if we could find an alternate space for those 3 months that could be fenced, because the people who attend that park really go because it is fenced often.
The dog walkers?
They're not dog walkers as such. For myself, I go there after dark. I have a dog. I have 2 dogs. One's old, one's young. I can't walk at an accelerated pace with the dogs. I feel very safe there, and there's a lot of women, I think, that go there because they do feel safe in that area. They can see what's coming around them. There's incapacitated people there. There's lonely people there, and we congregate at that park for those very reasons. I think that. Perhaps the Housing Commission flats draws people, and the South Bank flats draws people who can sit there and they can exercise their dogs and they can have a chat. There's a notice on the fence at the moment that says you can go to Fawkner Park or Albert Park. I think they mean reserve. And just like you were saying about Lagoon Park, I don't really feel safe walking through there. It gets dark at 6 o'clock now with my dog. It's also a place where people come when their puppies are young, and we also give them a sort of an element of education there by them being in this small area, but their dogs aren't going to run away. I was at Gasworks this morning and heard the screech of cars as the dog ran across, left and left the park. I don't know whether I've encapsulated everything. I'm trying to be fast, but it need not be a fenced area of a park. Perhaps it could be something that's already fenced, like a tennis court that's not in use, or a car park or something like that. I did speak to somebody at the council, and they were in very practical measures telling me about the maintenance on the park, but I don't know if the council actually realises the community spirit of that park. So if something could be done very quickly, because it is closing on June 10th for 3 months, would be very appreciative.
Well, thanks very much, Elizabeth. I'll ask Ms. Blair again. Can I say, fantastic articulation of the opportunities that we provide people who own dogs to socially bond, walk their dogs, and fencing is important. I agree with you. I've owned dogs in the past, so I don't know what the answer to your question is, and I'll ask Ms. Blair to do it, but completely there's a lot of sympathy for that view around the table, I think.
Okay. And just say I don't know that a lot of people have realised it's going to close, and I think it may hit a lot of people like a ton of bricks next Monday when it does close.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Ms Blair.
Through you, Mr Mayor, yes, we are having a temporary closure of that park for approximately a 3-month period while we renovate and restore the grass. It's absolutely a very popular area, and which is why there's a need to renovate it. In the past, we've been trying to renovate it whereby we close small sections to try and keep the park, other bits of the park open, and that hasn't been successful, hence why we've had to close it this time. We can explore alternate sites. That's not something that we can do quickly. However, if there was an area that council wanted to designate as an off-lead, we're required to go through a statutory process, and so that statutory process would require a council meeting, a gazettal, and then appropriate advertising in the local paper. So it's not something that you can do in a couple of weeks. So if council wanted us to investigate it, we could. We would probably, at best, be able to return to council in July, and by the time we went through the process, it'd be more likely the end of July, which is only a month before this would open. So I certainly, as a dog owner myself, who walks at all hours of the day, I can appreciate the concerns of the dog walkers. So, as I said, if council wants us to, we can look, but the time frame for doing that would put it pretty close to when the park would reopen.
Thanks very much, Ms Blair. Councillor Voss.
Thank you. Ms Blair, if a park was already off-leash, would you still need to go through the statutory processes of consultation, or could you just section off some of it?
If it was already off-leash, we wouldn't have to go through a gazettal process. What we would need to consider is fencing off an area would result in higher use, so we're likely to then be required to renovate that particular area as well. So that's something that we would look at. We would need to consider if we were to install fences. The other, thing we would need to consider is in the installation of fences is what other consultation we would need to do if that was an area that doesn't have a fence that we're putting it up as well.
Councillor Simic.
Ms Blair, is it possible to defer the planned maintenance while an alternate or a solution is found? Is that something that's open to?
We could. The renovation of the grounds, though, usually needs to happen at a particular time of year, and so that would have been one of the reasons the officers have looked at doing it now as well.
Councillor Voss.
Slightly off the request, but clearly Eastern Road Reserve is incredibly well utilised. And probably overused, given it needs to be repaired all the time. What plans have we got to have other parks that are fenced?
Through you, Mr Mayor, the council is currently in the process of developing its public space strategy. So looking at additional fenced areas for dog off-lead areas is something that could be considered that's being considered as part of that process. I think the challenge in the city of Port Phillip is the lack of open space and the many competing demands for it, but it's certainly something that's going to be picked up in the public space strategy.
Okay. Councillor Pearl.
Quickly, would it be possible, I've mooted this before and I'm quite eager to move it forward, the Triangle Reserve on Howie Crescent, Cecil Street and Park Street there, which is very underutilised. Would it be possible to set up a temporary fenced area there? Would that still require gazetting? So say if we had an event type permit there for say 4 or 5 weeks, that we could temporarily allow that to be a dog off-leash area with a fence around it? Is there any provision that we could test that out?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I would have to check that. The act with which we need to comply with is the Domestic Animal Act, but we'll look into it. But I'm not sure, given even a 6-week period of time. But it's something that we can look into to see if there is a way to accommodate that. Another site that officers had looked at, which is nearby, is a corner site just on the corner of Dorcas Street and Kingsway. There's a small triangular space there as well that's possible that we could look at. It is very small, so again, that's the challenge.
Thanks very much. We've had a number of creative suggestions from councillors. Is there one last one?
Just want to note also, it was exciting to see a dog park being announced in South Bank of all places this week underneath the tram bridge. So City of Melbourne doing some exciting things there in terms of what has been pretty useless space in that area, and they're converting that to a dog park in the next 6 months. So it'll be exciting to see how that works out. So there's another option coming down the line for residents in South Bank and South Melbourne.
Right. Thanks very much, everyone. Final question, James Willett.
Is this on? Sorry.
Yep.
My name is James Willett. I live in Middle Park and I represent the members of the Middle Park Library Action Group. I would like to refer you to the City of Port Phillip CEO's June 2019 report, where on page 29 he states, "Work has progressed on the Library Action Plan with a consultant appointed. A community engagement approach for this project is a priority, including consultation with multiple stakeholders, library members, non-library members, internal council departments and councillors." In February of this year, I received the following reply from a council official to my question about how organisations like Middle Park Library Action Group can have an input into the proposed plan. This is his reply. "I would assume Middle Park Library Action Group would be an active participant in that process and would be invited to attend and engage in a focus group or workshop session, as well as input and feedback through other avenues, such as targeted surveys. The Council's brief for the consultant recommended 16 to 22 hours of consultation with Council officials and just 4 hours for community consultation. The consultant's timetable states that the preliminary report with analysis and recommendations should be delivered in June 2019. The brief for the consultant, repeating myself, from today, the consultant has just 16 working days to produce the preliminary report. Our questions are, 1, has consultation with stakeholder groups begun? When will library user groups, like the Middle Park Library Action Group, be able to have input into the development of the library plan? And 3, now that the CEO has stated that community engagement is a priority, which by my dictionary definition says the most important consideration, how will he make sure that council officials follow through? Thank you.
Through you, Mayor. So the consultant has been appointed and the Library Action Plan is due sometime in the next financial year. The timeline was in the original tender spec which went out, and there were late expressions of interest. We had trouble getting consultants, so that timeline's been extended because it took us some time to appoint the consultant. I can confirm that I've specifically asked that the consultant meet with the Middle Park Library Action Group, and that she will contact the Middle Park Library Action Group over the next month, I would imagine, to have a meeting. and then there will be the regular process of consultation as per standard council procedures on engagement. And there will obviously, that will involve a draft plan which will go out for consultation widely.
Thanks very much, Mr. Keenan. Thanks, Mr. Waller. Thank you. Councillors, it's councillor question time. Councillor Pearl.
Thanks, Mayor. My question relates to Bubba Womanjeka. I just wanted to get an update on when the CCTV cameras will be installed. It's been many, many months and they're still not there. As of this morning, they weren't there in any case.
Thanks, Ms. McLean.
Through you, Mayor, we have installed monitors as a priority so that the entrances can be monitored, and we haven't installed CCTV yet. We're undertaking a review of how and where we install CCTV. We've got CCTV in a number of our buildings, and a number of buildings we don't. And so we're just undertaking a review of what are the triggers and when do we install them, and making sure that when we do install them that we understand the cost and the maintenance requirements, as well as making sure that we're addressing a need that can't be addressed in any other way.
Councillor Pearl.
So we have these cameras at our town halls, protecting vulnerable staff members that sit in these town halls. The wiring's been installed for the camera. We've installed a buzzer out the front door with a camera on it so they can see who's coming in. The council provided a commitment to the centre that they would install the camera, and they've partially done the job. Why is it good enough for people at town halls to be protected, and it's not good enough for us to have
Can I
children?
rule that out of order? I mean, some of those have been...
I've asked this question three times in a council meeting, and I've never had that brought up. It's just not good enough that we've been told twice in official council meetings that it's happening and it's going to be installed, and then I'm told tonight that it's been delayed because we need to put policies in place to see if it's the right place to put them.
I think that's a legitimate question, but the comparison with the town halls is less legitimate because they might have been installed some years ago, and it's
We're happy to address the question.
We're happy to address the question in regards to that childcare question.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, as we've indicated in previous meetings, we engaged a specialist consultant to actually look at security and safety around over 20 of our facilities. That came up with a recommendation of over 120 or 30 recommendations. We have been working through solidly, and it's not just in one facility, it's a whole range of different facilities. And some of the issues at Bubba Womanjeka were not actually included in that report, but we have taken some additional works and tried to prioritise that. Ms McNeil is correct. We need a view on ensuring that if we're going to put in CCTV, that we are going to do it consistently across all different kinds of facilities. So not just Bubba Womanjeka, but do we need to be doing this now for all our children's facilities? So she is working through a process to have a defined policy position on that, to ensure that we know what the costs look like. In the meantime, we have been doing works to improve the safety and security of that facility, and we are going through a diligent process. We're reporting it to the Audit Committee shortly around all the work that we're doing to improve security across all our facilities, not just this one.
Sorry, Mr. CEO.
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Carroll, have we previously given an undertaking to install CCTV in that centre? I think that was the question.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I can't recall our exact commentary on that specific centre. What I can say is that we took on board the feedback. The centre did outline a range of issues and requests. We took on board a number of those, and we've acted on some of them. I can't tell you right tonight exactly what the commitment was on that facility around CCTV, although we did say that we would look into it.
Councillor Pearl. Is this a question? Or?
Yes, question. What's been communicated to the centre? So the centre's under the very clear impression that they're receiving one camera in their foyer area, and the reason that camera has been expedited under the review was on the basis that some very disturbing events have taken place where that camera would be, and one involving a staff member being assaulted on the street level, and some others as well. So I think this is the staff there view as a high-risk area, and very concerned parents are constantly coming to me asking what is going on, particularly as they're sitting there every day watching works happen and boxes being placed up, yet the final instrument still hasn't been applied yet. So what's been communicated to the centre, because they're very clearly under the impression that this is to be installed very soon?
Through you, Mayor, the previous CEO of the centre was insisting that one be installed. The monitor was installed, which was dealing with the front door issue and who was coming in and out of the building, which, as I understand, would have dealt with that security breach. There's been discussion, but there has been no undertaking. There's been a discussion to address the security issues. I'm not aware of any undertaking being given to it that the security cameras would be installed. There's been a lot of assertions from the former CEO that they must be and should be, but there hasn't been an undertaking given. There's a security report which people are moving through. We've put the monitors in to respond to the immediate issue, and there's been no undertaking that I'm aware of for security cameras to be put into the centre.
Thanks very much. Let's leave this issue at this stage. Thanks very much, officers. Councillor Voss.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to ask a couple of questions around the CEO report.
Sorry, we're not on to that yet. We're just on general councillor question time. So we're still asking general questions, and there doesn't appear to be any, so I'll move on to presentation of reports. Councillors, can I open for issues 8.1, the CEO's report? Councillors, we have no members of the community who wish to talk about that, but I can see we've got a question from Councillor Voss, because I'm psychic.
Thank you, sorry. I'd like to ask about a couple of the claims made in the CEO report, just a bit of clarification, please. First one is about long day care. It's an item on page 35. It talks about that management has implemented a number of initiatives to increase utilisation of long day care. Just wanted to understand what those initiatives might be. I guess my concern is around potentially competition and the childcare waiting list. I'm just trying to understand that, please.
Through you, Mayor, the Council have been concerned, rightly, with the utilisation levels at the council-run centres. So we've initiated a number of things. I guess the main one is looking at discounted rates on the low days to offer to families, just to see if, where there was low attendance, marketing through social media channels, and the other ones I'd have to take on notice, but they're the ones that I can recall off the top of my head. Yeah.
Councillor Simic?
I had a question on the same topic, and I'm wondering if you can elaborate a little bit on what's led to some of those low days, given that there is a wait list and there's people on the wait list, and yet we're still struggling to fill some of our days.
Through you, Mayor. Thanks, Councillor Simic. The main driver is the increase in supply of places across the city, and long day care is very different to running a school. If you operate a school, you've got the same number of kids in the school from 8:30 Monday morning to 3 o'clock Friday. What we find is that Tuesdays, Wednesdays and Thursdays are tight. It's hard to get kids in. There's a lot of vacancies on the Mondays and Fridays. So it's quite a trick managing long day care because you don't have that predictability of kids across the whole week. Some of the other issues is making judgments around whether it's economic to close a room. We haven't got to that point yet, other than at Barang Janine. But it's a range of those things. But I think one of the biggest drivers is that there is increasing supply of places across the city, and there's more competition.
Councillor Voss.
Maybe you should stay there for a little bit longer, Mr. Keenan, but I just wanted to generally ask everyone here, before I ask my real question, do you know what the names Libby, Linda, Canopy, Belinda and Gail all have in common? Yeah, so there's a lot of blank looks around the table here, but they're applications that our library uses. Anyway, Mr. Keenan, well, Mr. Keenan might be able to explain it a bit better, but I was pretty excited to get onto the website of the library and discover an application called Gale, and Gale is something. It's basically Lonely Planet online that we have available in our library, and all of these other tools are various tools that we have available online, our e-library. Some of them are books, some of them are, they're all sorts of things, Borrow Box, etc. My question is, our library offerings quite extensive, and I didn't know that these were things that we had. How are we promoting these amazing tools?
Through you, Mayor, I have to take that on notice how we're specifically promoting it, but the uptake and increase of e-books and those resources is enormous. One of the issues we're raising with the measurements that you get about use of library, it doesn't currently include the uptake and use of e-books, which we need to get fixed centrally through government because it's now a very big part and an important part of the library offer. It's great when residents travel. If they've got an e-reader, they can be overseas and borrow a book.
That's right, that's overseas. What I'm thinking. Yeah. You know, I'm going overseas, I'm going straight to the library.
Absolutely.
Do it at home, yeah. I'll need some old man advice from the library.
We provide old man advice, Mayor.
So, Mr. Keenan, I'd really like to see how we're promoting that. So if you could take that on notice and bring that back, that'd be great.
Can I promote something now? That if you go on to our...
question?
No. Just that I'm on many an audiobook in our library.
Could you ask the Mayor whether he was aware of that?
The one, Mayor, were you aware that many an audiobook I have read is accessible through our library? I would particularly recommend The Lost Flowers of Alice Hart as a starting point.
I wasn't aware of that. Thank you, Councillor Crawford. Okay, are there any further questions? Councillor Voss.
Yes, in this EO report there is a mention or recommendation by OH&S to increase our security patrols. It refers to a report. I'm just wondering if that report will be made public.
Through you, Mr Mayor, the reference relates to some additional security guards that were employed to help in managing the South Melbourne market. So given the South Melbourne market is a very important public space in our municipality, in 2018 an independent safety and security report was undertaken. Within that report there are a range of changes to practice, policies and some asset management solutions that were called for. Some of these changes are going to take some time to implement, particularly those that relate to the fabric of the asset. So as an interim measure, we've engaged some additional security guards to help in managing that, as well as the increase in patronage of the South Melbourne market. The recommendations within the report have been presented to the South Melbourne Market Committee, and progress is monitored regularly through a safety project control group that we have within the organisation. That group actually meets again tomorrow and meets regularly. In terms of release of the report, obviously we'd need to have some discussion with the South Melbourne Market Committee prior to any release of the report, and I can certainly undertake to do that.
Any other questions? Councillor Voss?
I have three more.
Okay.
So, there's in note 4 under net drawdowns, it talks about the underspends, and what it states is that all capital works underspends will be quarantined in asset renewal. Just wondering if you can clarify those words. It just maybe is a bit general. Thanks.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. That might be a bit general. Basically, where the expenditure is needed in a future year, we will keep that money in reserves and then we'll allocate it to the future year. If it relates to savings on asset renewals, so we actually have an underspend and we don't need all the money because we've been able to deliver the project. If it relates to asset renewals, then we do bank that money and put it aside for future asset renewals. If it's savings on some other programs, then that may go back into consolidated revenue.
And that was the answer I was after. Thank you. And I'd just like to, Councillor Pearl referred to this park earlier. It looks, or the area, the changes in the portfolio around bike infrastructure delivery on the corner of Park and Cecil Street. It says there's issues with Vic roads in terms of delivering that intersection. Just wondering why Vic roads would be involved. That's on page 37.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the works involve an upgrade to the traffic signals so that we can install bike detector signals, and we require Vic Roads approval to do that works. And there's been some delay because there's some issues with the conduits. So the project will be completed in 1920.
Thanks very much, Ms Rosich.
Okay, and my last question, you'd be happy to know, is around North Port Oval. The upgrades, the oval's looking fantastic. It says in the report that it will be completed in June 2021. I was just curious about what is next on the list of things to do.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Next on the list of things to do was the installation of training level lights, or if there is another funding source, that some of that money would go towards a higher level of lighting for games and TV. That would be subject to external funding. It was also looking at the perimeter fence and gates to make it more welcoming to the community outside of the football season, and also some reserve infrastructure outside, so things like seats, picnic tables, barbecues.
Okay, if there are no further questions, councillors, we have a resolution. The officer's recommendation moved Councillor Pearl, seconded Councillor Voss. Do you wish to speak, Councillor Pearl? Councillor Voss?
Yes, just wanted to say thanks again for a comprehensive report. I had to note one good thing in it as well. There's plenty of good stuff in it, but one was there. Just congratulations to all the schools and to the organisation for the terrific results that we got in the Ride to School Day. I think that's certainly something to sing out and continue to promote. Thank you.
Anyone else? I might just say my piece on this. Look, there's so much happening. There is so much happening, from the car share policy to the basketball tournament that was described in the front of the report, composting with the community, the water management, which I'm very proud of. Fisherman's Bend is achieving great things. So there's a lot to be proud of, and our officers are incredibly busy. But as busy as they are now, I just wish to warn everyone that this is sort of the beginning. Because of the excellent and amazing advocacy of my predecessor, Councillor Voss, where we got 10 out of the 11 asks, I think that was the ratio, of the state government. This state budget is full of extraordinarily important pieces of large infrastructure for the city of Port Phillip. And we will have to buttress those with ancillary investment in infrastructure. For example, the St Kilda Pier, I think that's $50 million, and we will probably try to do the hinterland and the foreshore at the same time. The central bike path in St Kilda Road, once again, I think $18 million. $27 million, thank you, Mrs. Ian. So we will have to, once again, look at the bicycle infrastructure for the roads off that central spine. So that's great. And in the federal election, due to the fact that we are now a swinging seat, we've got promises from the Liberal government of $50 million. $12.5 million is already in the budget for an idea around Annam and the South Melbourne Town Hall. And so I say this is Bob the Builder time in the city of Port Phillip, and it means further challenges for us in terms of finding out how we can support those investments. It's exciting but challenging, and it's over to you in the future, Mr. CEO, to deliver it. So these are things that will emerge in the CEO's report over the next few years, and well done for our fantastic officers who've done that advocacy, and Councillor Voss and the CEO. Any further? Anyone wish to close? We'll move to the vote now. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Agenda item 12.1, St Kilda Marina Planning Scheme Amendment. We have two speakers on this, Peter Holland and Peter Tanner, the two Peters. So can I ask Peter Holland to come up and read his name and suburb into the record, please?
Peter Holland, St Kilda. I know that we all want to get a great marina as soon as possible, and what we don't want is more costly delays, and we don't want a second-rate marina. So I've got three questions on this item. One, is a planning scheme amendment necessary? Two, is it really possible to run an amendment and an EOI process concurrently? And three, is it appropriate to take the master plan approach? So on my first question, is a planning scheme amendment necessary? Clearly the answer is no. The existing marina was built without such a provision, so why cannot the new one? The project approach that Council approved back in February 2008 envisaged that a planning scheme amendment may not be required. The justifications given in the officer's report are that the planning scheme will provide specificity and certainty. It doesn't convince me. I think that the site brief, which is quite acceptable, and provisions in any future EOI are sufficient for specificity and certainty. We've got the definition of marina in the St Kilda Land Act that's sufficiently wide to enable the council to encourage the non-boating activities that it wants, such as food and drink outlets. And regarding activities that the council doesn't want, such as a service station, again, the council can use its powers as a landlord under the St Kilda Land Act and under the Marine and Coastal Act to prohibit
undesirable activities. So my conclusion is that a planning scheme amendment may be nice to have, but it's not a have to have. Secondly, is it possible to run a planning scheme amendment process and an EOI concurrently? The officers say that it can be done, but the risk here is that we'll have significant delays, years of delays, if we can't run the two processes concurrently. Again, the site brief is acceptable. If, however, we have this planning scheme amendment, then people like myself are going to be arguing for changes. I'll be arguing that there should be an incentive for tenderers to build the bridge by giving them additional commercial floor space. Councillor Copsey's supporters may be arguing for changes, as we heard last time. So I don't see how the council can credibly run an EOI process concurrently. It's very expensive for tenderers to prepare a submission. Surely the tenderers can't be expected to prepare a submission on the basis of the site brief and whatever changes will emerge from the planning scheme amendment processes. So if we can't run those two processes concurrently, if the state government says that we can't run those two concurrently, then we're looking at horrendous delays to the project. Thirdly, is there a need for a master plan approach? And here my concern is that we risk a second-rate marina. Again, the site brief and EOI I think is quite sufficient. With the master plan, we're risking limiting potential great designs that are non-complying with the master plan. I know that I can't build a marina. The officers have never built a marina. Presumably we're going to be employing expensive consultants to design some theoretical marina. But what we should be doing is letting the tenderers unleash their creative juices within the site brief. I know that Councillor Pearl often says this, let 100 flowers bloom, let 100 schools of thought contend. That's what we should be doing with the marina. Oh, I thought you quoted Chairman Mao often. I think that what we should be doing is we should think carefully about whether we want to go down the master plan route. I think we shouldn't. I think we're risking a second-rate marina. I think that the EOI and the site brief is quite sufficient guidance. We'll get a fantastic new marina out of that.
Thanks for those great questions. Because this is an agenda item, I'll take up your questions with the officers after we've heard from Mr. Peter Tanner.
Peter Tanner, St Kilda. I've provided all the councillors with my paper that I was going to present tonight. There's been a bit of a hiccup with that. I've received a response from the council, from the manager strategy and design, and based on that development I'll raise each of the points but change them a bit based on the responses received. So the first point I wanted to raise was the applying the special use zone, which has been issued by DELP fairly recently in 2017. That special use zone standard wasn't actually mentioned within the agenda paper. The response from management that I received this afternoon states that, I'm paraphrasing a bit, that the new zone, issue Z zone, will aid the planning process. I would continue to argue that removing a level of planning input is somewhat inconsistent, is somewhat consistent with a dictatorial approach that may occur in an undemocratic country. Whilst it may specify the planning, I don't agree that, whilst it might simplify the planning process, I don't agree that the removal of a third-party input will aid long-term planning. The response that I received today provides two examples within the state of Victoria where issue Z has been used, and one local example quoted is the St Kilda Sea Baths. I would say that the Marina Reserve was recently developed in 2012 that included a skate park, and Vacant objection was not permitted at that time of development. It continues today to be a public park recreation zone, so I would argue that that the same approach could occur at the Marina. Another response, the response today did not mention that the two adjacent sites to the Marina are currently parks, and if they weren't, then that would satisfy one of the DELP standards, but they are currently zone parks. My second point was that the Development Plan Overlay, DPO, notes the site has the response received today notes the site has a mix of uses as contained within the site brief, which makes the site stand out as being unusual in its public and private characteristics, and therefore more appropriate for a SUS zone. No mention of my point that Albert Park and Marine Reserve have master plans and remain public park recreation zones, and Albert Park would be a particularly complex and unusual site, and it obviously is still a public park recreation zone. The third point I raised was the appointment of a commercial operator. The response received today does acknowledge that a commercial operator has operated on the site for the past 50 years and mentions that expense...
Just quickly wind up.
Okay, all right. Mentions that the site has been... my last point is mentions that the aim is to... The response received today mentions that the aim is to minimise the amount of change to the existing planning controls, and hence WDO 10 design and development will remain unchanged. I think changing the site to a SUS is not consistent with that goal of minimal change. I would note that mandatory sentencing is often argued to deliver certainty, but is generally seen to be regressive. And thank you.
Thanks very much. So there's no further questions. So councillors' questions. Can I lead off by reiterating Mr. Holland's questions to officers? The planning issues, Mr. Dewar. So the three questions were, do we need a planning scheme? Can it run a planning scheme amendment run concurrently with a process of procurement? And should we have a master planning process with more flexibility involved?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. On the first one, whether a planning scheme amendment is necessary, Council needs to undertake a planning scheme amendment if it wants to change the planning controls for St Kilda Marina. And in this instance, we're proposing to rezone the St Kilda Marina site from Public Park and Recreation Zone, PPRZ, to a special use zone with a new schedule and a development plan overlay. Officers did consider whether we could just rely on the existing controls under the PPRZ, and it was felt that there was a risk that the vision and the objectives of the site brief that we carefully developed with through the community panel might not be achieved because we believe that the existing controls aren't specific enough. Also, going forward, the site brief would also not form part of the consideration when assessing a planning permit application, and we felt that that was an important acknowledgement to the work that's been undertaken so far. The proposed planning scheme amendment will...
So can I stop there just for a moment of clarification? Mm-hmm. So that means that some of the ideas and rules in the site plan will be incorporated in the schedules to the new planning scheme amendment?
Through you, Mr Mayor, yes, that's correct. The planning scheme amendment will translate the site brief that we developed through the community panel into planning controls. If adopted, then this informs planning decisions and ensures that master planned approach.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's right. On the second issue about concurrence, and if I understand Mr Holland's concerns correctly, on one hand, we're proposing to run a commercial procurement process for the marina lease, and on the other hand, a full planning amendment process where we invite the community into a public exhibition process. And the concern is that at the end we reach two outcomes which are divergent from one another. Through the planning of the amendment process, this has been something that's been given a great deal of consideration, and we believe that, contrary to that view, running the two things in parallel actually ensures that we do get an integrated outcome between the planning process, because the planning scheme amendment process will inform the finalisation of the procurement process, and we think that therefore minimises the risk of getting unintended consequences. What that means is that further to the community involvement in preparing the site brief, running the concurrent processes means that the community can continue to participate in the conversation around the planning scheme and the marina through that public exhibition process. And things that come out through that process can then be fed back into the procurement process if there are substantive changes. We also believe that running the scheme in parallel actually does provide procurement clarity to the market and proposed tenderers, because they understand the process that we're running, and we've made the alignment of the projects clear. And lastly, and perhaps to touch on the master plan approach, we think that the development plan overlay does ensure a holistic master planned approach, which we think is appropriate for the size, for a site of this size and its location. And we don't believe that, we do believe that there is still enormous scope for proponents to decide how they can best achieve the requirements of the brief and arrange the components of their plans within the envelopes that a master plan would envisage. And probably would end on saying that we believe that creativity thrives within constraints, and whilst much of the guidance in the site brief is about minimum targets and outcomes, we would hope that through the procurement process, proponents would seek to either exceed some of these targets, or through the competitive nature of the EOI, submit excellent and innovative proposals to us.
Thanks very much for that. Further questions? Councillor Brand?
Just on one question implicit in Mr Holland's points about running the planning scheme amendment and the procurement process concurrently. What happens if there's a substantial change from the recommended planning scheme amendment that arises during that process of consultation and negotiation with consultation with the public? How does that affect how would that affect the procurement process, which would already be in train?
Through you, Mayor, the way that we've designed both processes is that there's reducing uncertainty over time. So if we were to not undertake the planning scheme amendment now and to undertake it later, then there's a lot of uncertainty for the market or for whoever goes through and is awarded the tender. The way that we're doing it in this, in a concurrent approach, is that there is some uncertainty whilst the community conversation is underway and council's considerations are underway and the panel considerations, but the tenderers know the process has been undertaken, so they have that certainty that they understand the process and that we've got points in time where we can feed in any changes into that of the planning scheme process into the procurement process. And so we've carefully constructed the procurement timeline to make sure that we're able to respond. Of course, we can't control every element of the planning scheme process, and there is a risk of delays, but we do think that all in all it provides much more certainty for the market to do it this way than to wait, and for a successful tenderer to then have to potentially wait another 18 months to 2 years before they're confident that they're able to proceed clearly with their permit and their designs and their development. So there's some uncertainty up front, but there's greater certainty through that process.
Any further questions, or do we go to resolutions? Okay, if there are no further questions... Councillor Copsey.
There was a community question around third-party appeal rights and the changes that might come about as a result of rezoning. Could you comment on that?
Through you, Mr Mayor. That's correct. Through the instrument that is being proposed, the development plan overlay, that would restrict third-party notice and appeal rights. In essence, in this process, what we're trying to work with the community on is kind of front-ending that certainty. So through the planning scheme amendment process and through the site briefs that we've already developed in collaboration with them, we can build certainty around what the outcomes on the site are going to be, so such that when we get to that end process, then we don't... what's agreed through the procurement process and in the DPO, the two things should be aligned, and therefore we think that should just be an orderly process to enable development then.
Through you, Mr Mayor, if I could just add to that, it is included in the report, but we have also proposed and recommended that Council undertake a non-statutory community consultation on the detailed design of the development and the development plan itself.
Councillor Brand.
I just want to ask a general principle question which has concerned me all the way through, but I think it probably needs to be discussed at each step. Just, I guess, just to sort of give that sense that these issues are always being taken into account. But in this particular step with the planning scheme, we've been very intent all the way through with, as it says at one point in 6.5 J, it will also need to include enough details, blah, 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 to give council and community and tenderers certainty about the expected development outcome. They've been very... All of the language in here is about creating certainty about the expected outcome, but there's always been this question about how it will allow a degree of flexibility for unexpected development outcomes. And that's been our sort of concern all the way through. I think we ended up resolving with the site brief a pretty reasonable outcome on that. But I'm just saying at this point, how are we to understand that this sort of contradictory ideal of that I would say allowing enough flexibility required to allow the flexibility as opposed to certainty to allow unexpected outcomes. Good ones, I'm presuming.
Through you, Mayor, the way that the site brief has been developed, which will form the basis of the planning scheme amendment, is that there's certainty provided on key items, and then there's opportunity space for other things. So things that such as heights of buildings and size of footprint of the commercial allowed, and size of the boat storage, which are all key aspects that have a significant impact on the site. Certainty is provided in that there's maximum developable limits around those things, but within those there's lots of opportunity for interpreting and utilising those limits to build and construct the site and design the whole site as an integrated solution that is innovative. So, for instance, there's a significant building footprint or envelope provided for the whole site of where buildings can occur, but the allowable limit of built form is a lot smaller than that envelope across the whole site, and so there's a lot of opportunity for the designers to come up with designs within that to have the luxury of spreading out across the site and coming up with something innovative, but there's limits on the amount overall that they can build. So there's limits, but there's also lots of opportunity within those limits.
Okay. Any further questions? Let's move to the resolutions. Councillors, officers have submitted a recommended resolution on page 44. Do I have a mover? Councillor Bond? Councillor Pearl? Councillor Bond? No. Councillor Pearl?
I think it was Peter Holland that once quoted to me, "We shape our buildings, thereafter they shape us." I think is what I'm pretty sure you did say that to me.
And that was first said by Lennon?
The great Winston Churchill. It's important we get this process right, and thank you, Peter, for the valuable input that you've put into this in the questions you ask, because they are valuable and they help extract information out of officers which make the process better. I think this is a logical recommendation. I'm happy to support it.
Anyone else? I will say thanks very much to Mr. Holland, and all of those questions have been asked in and around this table. The other thing I'd say is that I want to thank the officers for this recommendation. I'm persuaded by their logic, and I look forward to a happy outcome with the planning scheme amendment. Councillor Brandon and Councillor Copsey. It's been moved and seconded.
Okay. Just want to check. Yeah, I'll be supporting the motion, with still with a series of question marks in my mind about things yet to be discussed. But this is a stage of the process which is putting forward the basic proposal, the recommended proposal for further consultation and discussion. And I think that it deserves a lot more discussion, partly because it is so complex and so, to me, difficult to get my head around. There are so many different layers of the process, none of which I have a particular problem with. It's just getting your head around the whole thing with the special use zone, which in a sense frames the development plan. What's it called? DPO. Development plan. Yep. Sorry, I'm going weird. Which frames which gives the sort of the framework for the DPO to be sort of applied, which requires a schedule to be written that is, I suppose, expresses what the site brief is, and a concept plan which also is meant to be an accurate representation of the site brief. So you've got a concept plan in the DPO, and then along with that you have the development plan, which comes from the ultimately from the winning tenderer, I think, and that has to be congruent with or at least compatible with the concept plan and the schedule. And then once there's a development plan in place, then they go and do more work, and there has to be a development in place for them to put an application for a permit in. So there's all this sort of Russian doll. It's sort of sleeves within sleeves within sleeves, and I'm concerned that at different parts of that process there may be times when anomalies might happen, when small inconsistencies might arise, insignificant sometimes, but that may actually cause enough friction with the sleeve just outside it to make it rather difficult. And I'm keen to work through some of these issues to see that to ensure that these different instruments are written in a way that actually allow a little bit of space and flexibility for all of the different possibilities that we want to allow to happen to move through without getting stuck. There's also the question of third-party rights, which doesn't seem to have attracted very much attention. I'm actually quite pleased about that. I think this is actually probably the right thing to do in the current scheme. I think that there's been so much public consultation on so many aspects of this, particularly the site brief, which for me personally, the site brief is probably too restrictive, but I think that we reached a very, very good consensus position on it, and all of these the planning scheme amendments itself are all going to have more and more scrutiny still, that it comes to the point where all of the rules that affect and control all of the other rules that have been set have all been set with a deep public contribution, a deep public sort of participation in it, and by the time it comes out at the other end, it will have been so much shaped and controlled by public input that I think it's a fair thing to say that it'll come out. It will come out very much just in the shape of that, and sort of inevitably. So I think I think the disruption of having then the opportunity for especially vexatious sort of objections into VCAT, I think is always an ever-present danger, and I think it's good that we have eliminated that from the environment that these tenderers and these decision makers are working in. So I'm very happy with this overall process, although I do want to participate in the next in this stage of finalising the planning amendment. So are you supporting it?
Thanks very much, David. Councillor Copsey.
Thank you, Mayor. I find myself, again, regrettably, unable to support the officer's recommendation tonight, though I do thank the officers for the work and the consideration that's gone into presenting the benefits of the approach that's recommended. I can see many of those. On balance, I consider that there's also some disbenefits around the rezoning in particular, from public park and recreation zone to special use zone. I am concerned, one, about the signal of that generally. There have been a lot, I won't go back over the reasons I had for not supporting the ultimate site brief at any great length, but there have been particular community, particular elements of the preferred design that came through the community panel that I don't feel have been given enough weight in the site brief, as I outlined when we were considering that report. And I consider that some of those elements, like preservation of the foreshore environment and the public spaces, again, may get lost through the special use zone. I hope I'm incorrect again about this. It will all turn on what is in the schedule to the special use zone. Without knowing the detail of what's proposed to be in that schedule, I can't yet, with any confidence, say to the community that those elements are going to receive adequate protection. So I hope that when we come to, I consider this is likely to pass tonight on the officer's recommendation, and I hope that when we come to the actual documentation to be submitted as part of the planning scheme amendment, that I can feel comfortable then. But at this stage, I am concerned about some of that lack of certainty. The marina, of course, is not just the marina building itself. The site vision is a special place on the foreshore for everyone that welcomes a diversity of sustainable uses anchored by a working marina. So there is a lot of discussion about certainty Certainty for whom is what I'm concerned about. We're getting a lot of certainty for applicants and tenderers, but some of the elements of the site that were of the most importance to community, I don't yet have confidence that we're going to secure those through the process as outlined. I am also concerned about the loss of third-party appeal rights through the rezoning to special use zone. I consider that there were other planning mechanisms available that might have secured that certainty without the disbenefits that the rezoning, in my view, brings. And so I will be still working constructively on this project and hoping to have great input into the schedule. But unfortunately tonight I don't feel that we've quite landed in the right place.
Do you wish to close, Councillor Bond? Move to the vote. All those in favour? All those against? It's clearly carried. Thanks very much. Agenda item 12.2, St Kilda Marina project, endorsement of the procurement plan, updated probity plan, updated project. We have two speakers on this matter. Jeffrey Love.
Jeffrey Love, St Kilda, and thank you, Mayor, councillors and officers for this opportunity to address you on the St Kilda Marina proposal on behalf of the Bring Back Brooks Jetty Committee. I was actually hoping to steer clear of the Marina proposal. I've got quite a bit on my plate and I knew it would be a very complex issue. However, it does impinge. It does impinge on the Brooks Jetty issue. So I note that this report addresses the planning regulations covering the Marina precinct and that it refers to the site brief when addressing the broader St Kilda Beach precinct. There's a bit of overlap, I guess. The brief identifies iconic locations, including Brooks Jetty, which it describes as an important local landmark until the removal of the timber section by Parks Victoria. It mentions Melbourne Water's plans for repairs to the drain and acknowledges the site still has historic and heritage values. So Bring Back Brooks Jetty asks that its significant achievements to have the jetty rebuilt be acknowledged, including commissioning designs for a replacement jetty from a professional firm, namely Rogers Consultancy, developing a design competition, getting an undertaking from Parks Victoria that it would not prevent a replacement jetty, Melbourne Water's agreement to consider a drain rebuild that would accommodate a new jetty, and Foreshore Businesses' agreement that the current eyesore needs to be addressed for the good of the precinct. So the Bring Back Brooks Jetty committee asks, firstly, will COP consider amending the brief to acknowledge the possible or even likely rebuilding of Brooks Jetty? And secondly, ensure that the marina development include its relationship to the broader St Kilda Beach precinct, including the Brooks Jetty site, by making provision in the EOI document that tenderers be invited to consider rebuilding Brooks Jetty as a functional part of the marina project or as a public benefit. And Council should make available the information provided by the Rogers Consultancy and others to the tenderers. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jeff. Can we ask officers during... I intend to pursue it and you can pursue that, Councillor Simmons, during the discussion. Peter Holland, please. Thanks. Sorry, Oggie.
Peter Holland, St Kilda.
Well, quoting Chairman Mao didn't help, so I'll quote a bit of law this time. I've got two issues. Now, if we're going to go down the master plan route, how do we best allow potential tenderers to contribute to the master plan? We want to encourage creativity and great design, and it's too late, I suggest, just to allow the formal process of allowing submissions on a draft amendment. I think that we should have some sort of system where the tenderers can have an early contribution contributing to the draft amendment itself. So the tenderers may want to talk to officers and consultants and councillors, but clearly that throws up two issues. One is probity, and the other is how do you keep the tenderers' great ideas confidential? We don't want to have a draft amendment that excludes draft ideas. We want to have a draft amendment that includes as many possibilities as possible. So I think here it's perhaps up to council to develop a protocol that allows tenderers to have an input into the drafting of the draft amendment. And then once you've developed that protocol, be proactive, invite the known interested parties to have a submission into the process of drafting the amendment. So that's my first point. I think it's really important that the master plan doesn't exclude potential great ideas. Secondly, community participation, transparency and community engagement. When you read the documentations, it's all 100% or 99% probity and maybe 1% transparency and community participation. I don't think we should have a probity advisor or a probity plan. I think we should have a transparency, community participation and probity advisor. So here, let me quote a little bit of law to start off with, and that's the Victorian Charter of Human Rights and Responsibilities. And it provides that every person in Victoria has the right and is to have the opportunity, without discrimination, to participate in the conduct of public affairs directly or through freely chosen representatives. And I suggest that when we bear that in mind, there's three amendments that I would propose for the procurement plan. The first is we should make explicit reference to that right. It should be in the procurement plan, as well as all the discussion of probity. Transparency should have equal weighting with probity. Secondly, and I suppose most controversially, I think that there should be councillor representation on the evaluation panel, perhaps the mayor and a ward councillor. I think that it's important that councillors aren't just pretty constitutional ornaments, rubber stamping decisions that are made by officers. And one way of doing this is to have councillors on the evaluation panel. And this, I'll point out, is consistent with the Auditor General's public sector procurement principles. So that's the second important point. Thirdly, public participation. Now, we've all been through the horrendous process of public participation in planning scheme amendments with butcher's paper and tapping into your smartphones, etc. The best way of getting public interest is having a beauty parade of the actual submissions. So to provide some sort of display of the actual submissions, some sort of popular vote, clearly it would be non-binding, but that would provide quite useful information for councillors when they're making their ultimate decision. We had something like this for the Lagoon competition for the triangle, but of course that was just a theoretical thing. In this case, if we've got a dozen actual submissions without the confidential information, but a dozen submissions for the public to consider and have a vote on, have an input on, it would be the most effective possible form of public participation. So the Charter of Human Rights is binding on the Council. I suggest that means that Council should consider those three amendments to the procurement plan. Thanks.
Thanks very much. Of the questioner? Okay, just one quick one. We should go straight to officers. Questions of officers.
What did the Auditor General have to say on councillor participation in procurement?
There is an Auditor General's statement of principles about procurement of public contracts, and it waxes lyrical about the importance of the boards of the various things taking an active role in the decision making. and it's wide enough to include the possibility of, in this instance, councillors being involved in being actually on the evaluation panel. I can forward the Auditor General's principles to you if you like.
Councillor Simic.
I'd like to thank both speakers and take on the questions by Mr Love, particularly in relation to Brooks Jetty, Council's, the relationship between the Marina and Brooks Jetty, and to what extent we've taken that the Brooks Jetty side into consideration in broader planning.
Through you, Mayor, there was significant discussion and consideration at the start of this project around what would be the scope of the project area, what would be included in the project and what would be excluded. And there was a decision to early on to exclude the area of Brooks Jetty and the question around shouldn't it be redeveloped, timing, scope, etc., because the project is complex enough within the project area of the current lease boundary, and including any other items around the project was considered to add too much complexity to the project, including the cost of possible redevelopment of Brooks Jetty on top of all of the other things that need to be achieved within the marina area, including things such as re-armouring the seawall and restoring other aspects of the marina itself.
Any further questions? Move to resolution. I'm happy to move. Sorry.
Thanks, Mayor. Council's involvement on the panel, how would that work from a compliance point of view? And if we were to do that, because I think there is actually some benefit in that, would there actually be any way that that could be workable under any process of this size and nature?
Through you, Mayor, we have looked at quite a few different ways that we could increase transparency and in the process, but also the role of council, and the advice that we've received, which is consistent for other projects, is that the decision maker and the panel are the ones that are coming up with the recommendations for the decision makers should be separated, and that is best practice. So having councillors on the panel, we would recommend then that they remove themselves as decision makers. And so the challenge for councillors, if they were removing themselves as decision makers and then becoming part of the panel, would be that they would have to put on the panel hat and not councillor hat. So they would have to be fully immersed in the panel process and following the process as would all of the other panel members. So there's an evaluation plan. The evaluation plan then needs to be followed, and that would be the same as any other panel member.
Mr Mayor, if I add to that, it's also would be a very large time commitment, and we need to be quite agile and be able to participate in the panel processes, and it would be a lengthy process, and also coming into potentially a time period around council elections and all those kind of things where there'd be real constraints on the council to participate in broader processes.
Yeah.
In fact, I think the Auditor General's principles, having just had a quick read of them and refreshed myself of them, do suggest that there needs to be a very clear separation of roles, and that would be my interpretation of it. And this procurement plan outlines both the roles of council and the roles of officers and the panels in the process. And my read of these principles, particularly the principle that I think Mr Holland was referring to, is that the plan we're proposing to you is actually in accordance with the recommendations of the Auditor General, just scanning through those principles around clarity of governance and roles.
Okay, councillors, any further questions? I'm happy to move the officer's recommendation. Is there a seconder? Seconded Councillor Bond. Councillors and officers, I think this is a very important moment. This large project is going to come back to this council. It's not finished with this council, but this is the moment where we get the third of our major documents through the long and exacting and highly consultative process that we have been through to get to this point. So for me it's an exciting time, and I hope you share that excitement. I wanted to address some of the issues raised by Jeffrey and Peter, but before I do, I really want to thank Michelle, Joe and Chris. It's writing these voluminous, and Damien, writing these voluminous reports that interact with each other, crossing planning and design and commercial considerations. It's been exacting, and I think we are now there, and I thank all of you and thank the CEO for his leadership. On the question raised by Mr Love on Brooks Jetty, I'm incredibly sympathetic and indeed empathetic with that. My approach in taking this was when I look back and learn from the cursed polygon. If you try to slay too many dragons, you get into trouble. So very early on I said to myself, Brooks Jetty can't be part of this. And indeed that would be a cost shift, because as you wash through the whole contractual relationship, if the developer pays for Brooks Jetty, this council, in terms of diminished return, pays for Brooks Jetty. And all of the way through the Brooks Jetty conversation I've said, we cannot pay for it, it is not our job. So for those two reasons, complexity and cost shifting, from the get-go I ruled it out as a part of this process. And then Peter raised this incredibly important issue about confidentiality and creativity. And once again, going back to the cursed polygon, where council got into trouble was looking secretive with the level of confidentiality, and where and we insisted on lots of confidentiality, and we lost the community's trust accordingly. But confidentiality has a role, and that role is to call forth creativity from the tenderers. So I have always agonised about the role of confidentiality, and I think we've got the balance right. And so that is something that I think I've agonised over, and I don't know whether I've got it right, but I think we have got it right. Which brings me to Mr Holland's contribution on transparency. And my view is that we have had buckets of transparency through various stages, through the community panel, through discussion and debate in open council, and I think there has been, and the CEO got some advice which I'm this evening, which I'm grateful for. And so the public participation has been massive, but there are times when you have to draw back for probity and efficiency reasons. And I'll finish by talking about the issue of probity and whether councillors should be involved in a different way. And I refer everyone to page 88 or page 11, the governance structure there. And looking at the governance structure, it does appear that the elected representatives have a constrained role. And I support that. And I support that because I've been persuaded that in terms of probity, that councillors can have a role at the start in fashioning the parameters in which the whole process goes. Councillors can have a role in setting the paradigm that we need to look at. But if we want to have a say at the end of the race, we can't be involved in the consideration in the middle of the process of the actual ideas and tenders. And I've been convinced on that, and I think that this passes the probity test. And it was a long conversation with officers about why we had to pull back, and I think I've been persuaded, and once again, in this complex and at times convoluted process, I think we've got the balance right. Finally, I want to thank you, councillors. I know this is odious, but councillors Bond and Brand have been particularly active in these conversations, so I'd like to thank them for that. Councillor Voss, my predecessor, was really important in guiding the process early, so this is a team process, and I thank everyone for their contribution, and I commend the motion to you. Councillor Bond.
I'm going to agree with Mr Holland on one thing. This is a beauty pageant and a beauty parade, except the element of the beauty pageant that Mr Holland focused on was the evening gown or the swimsuit, where you just line them up and pick the one that looks the prettiest. But a beauty pageant has other elements. There's the intelligence test, the talent section, and then the judges' questions. And when we get away from just focusing on the beauty and get to those other three elements of the beauty parade, we've all seen those videos where the contestant gets tripped up, and the one that we thought was brilliant looking in the evening gown probably should have kept their mouth closed. And that's exactly what we're doing here. Yes, some elements of this procurement process would look really good if they were put up on the wall and all we had to do was pick a pretty picture. But this is not just picking a pretty picture. This is a procurement plan in which an expert panel will choose the final outcome with much input from councillors. This is a very similar process to the process we used on the Palais Theatre, and we're all aware of what a great result we've achieved at the Palais Theatre and what a great outcome that was, not just for the council but also for Live Nation and also for the people of St Kilda as we watched that venue just go from strength to strength. Had the process to choose the winning tender for the Palais just been that swimsuit section of the beauty pageant, it may have been a very different outcome to the outcome we got for the Palais Theatre, where we also took into account the judges' questions, the talent section, and the intelligence. So, partially agree and partially disagree, and it's for these reasons that there does need to be an element of confidentiality about this. There are a lot of commercial and confidence factors involved here, as well as just which one looks good on the wall on a piece of paper. So for that reason, we're going to choose the process we've got here in front of us here tonight. And I'm sure, just like the Palais, the outcome we get at the end of this will be a great outcome, not just for the winning tender, but also for the city of Port Phillip and the public of Port Phillip as well.
Councillors, are there any further contributions? Councillor Pearl. Oh, Councillor Copsey? Councillor Pearl.
Page 14 details the process that will go through for this, in addition to the governance structure that was detailed on page 11 that the Mayor went through. And it is a rigorous process, and there is sufficient councillor involvement in that without compromising the overall process. And I take Mr Holland's point that councillors should be an integral part of the process, and in fact, if I had my way, Councillor Brand would be on the assessment panel but unfortunately, which he still technically probably could do, but he'd have to remove himself from the decision. There's a lot of knowledge in this group of people, particularly in the local ward councillors, that would add huge benefit to that process. But I think particularly Councillor Brandt has been able to infuse the process to this point, and particularly the community process, with enough information and guidelines to influence a really good quality result. But I'm nervous that we haven't got the balance right. I don't know if we've got the balance right. We won't know that for some time. It's the first time I've been through this size of a process like this. I've never been through a procurement the size of this. And it's in some respects very, very different from the Palais. So I trust the officer's judgment that we've got the balance of this right. And my gut feeling tells me we have, and which is why I'm very willing to support this evening, having probably of all councillors voted against more motions in relation to this project than anyone. But the reason I'm voting for it is I have confidence in the process I see in front of me, and I think this will deliver a very good outcome for our community and that place on the foreshore. As I said to that quote before, is we're going to shape this building, and this building will shape our community for decades to come, even hundreds of years to come. So it's in our best interest that we get this 100% right, and I don't think this is the perfect process. But we won't know that till the very end. But I think as I stand here today and everything I've seen behind the scenes, I think we have this right. But I'm open to feedback as we go along. Happy to support it.
Thanks very much, Councillor Pearl. Councillor Copsey.
Thank you. I am supportive of the documents that we're looking at in this suite, the probity plan, the procurement outline, and also the community and stakeholder engagement plan, which are all vital parts of the document, of the documentation. Port Phillip, unfortunately, has not always covered itself in glory in relation to probity and procurement, and I really thank our organisation for the diligence in taking on board lessons from the past and the rigour of the process that's been developed in relation to this project. In particular, probity has been a central concern throughout the entire process, from the very earliest gestation of the project all the way through, and thank you very much for the diligence in relation to that. In relation to the community and stakeholder engagement plan, I will also just note that because of the diminished community involvement and the loss of third-party appeal rights in relation to the rezoning, I now think it's very crucial that the non-statutory consultation in relation to the planning legislative process be well publicised and participated in, though I note, with regret again, that it doesn't offer the same statutory rights as would normally be available under the existing zoning.
Thanks very much, Councillor Copsey. I won't close. I'll move to the vote. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Thanks very much. Okay, I now move to 14.1, proposed discontinuance and sale of road at the rear of 225 Page Street, Middle Park. Councillors, there are no questions from or contributions from the public. Councillors, do you have any questions? Do you have any motions? Moved Councillor Pearl, seconded Councillor Voss. Do you wish to speak? Speakers against? None. I'll move to the vote. All those in favour? Unanimous. 14.2. Sorry? Oh, sorry. Are those against? That's been passed. 14.2. Proposed discontinuance and sale of road abutting 1 Little Graham Street, Albert Park. Are there any questions? Is there any motions? Moved Councillor Bond, seconded Councillor Voss. Is there... Sorry, Councillor Crawford. I say the hands as I see them. Do you wish to speak? Does anyone wish to speak? I'll move to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare it carried. Sorry, I've just got to get my stuff together. Uh, 14.3, endorsement of customer experience tender 2189. Is that correct? Are there any? There are no members of the public. We've exhausted them. Is there any questions from councillors? Not this one, the next one. That's been moved, Councillor Simic, seconded Councillor Crawford. Do you wish to speak, Councillor Simic?
This is a really big project and a very significant one for our council. As we know, it will require an upfront investment but deliver ongoing savings for council. I'd like to thank the officers for their hard and diligent work on getting us to this point, and would encourage councillors to support this so that we can progress this project and make sure it gets off the ground as quickly as possible with now a partner. Obviously it is a significant amount of money, so it's important we take this seriously, but I do support this given the rigour and diligence that our officers have put into this work to date.
Thanks very much. Councillor Crawford, do you wish to speak?
I just want to reiterate how important this is, and I know that some people are concerned with the big spend. Part of the reason that council, there may be thoughts in the community that council is not as effective as it could be, is partly that most of our technology exists from the 20th century. It is not up to date. It does not speak to each other. It does not allow officers to do their jobs efficiently in the world that is driven by technology today. So we need to move our technology and our customer experience, the whole package, into the 21st century. We all use phones and we expect an app that will deliver anything, anytime, anyhow, when we want it. Not that we're ever going to probably get to that point with council, but we do need to enable the council to officers to deliver and do the jobs that they want to do. So I am very happy to support this motion as the first step towards that.
Thanks very much, Councillor Crawford. Are there any other speakers? I'll move to the vote. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Thanks very much. 14.4, Procurement Policy Update. Councillors, there's no questions or comments from the community. Do you have any questions? Councillor Voss.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd just like to understand, if you could outline, in the recommendation it notes that a review of the procurement policy has been completed and that facilitates increased efficiency, probity and corporate and social responsibility. Yeah, but outline how it delivers that, please.
Through you, Mr Mayor. The review of the procurement policy is a legislative requirement annually that the Council needs to do. This is very much a light touch review this year with respect to the procurement policy. It basically reflects a number of changes with regard to recent legislative changes in the corporate social procurement environment, in particular the recent introduction of the Modern Slavery Act 2018. You'll note in the policy that we allude to the fact that councils, not only ours, but all councils are currently awaiting for advice from the Department of Home Affairs and MAV with respect to the guidelines and practical implementation of the Modern Slavery Act. We've also updated the policy to reflect some of the other corporate social responsibility policies with respect to working with children. There are increased requirements regarding OH&S compliance with respect to our procurement partners. With respect to efficiency, the threshold for spend authority in the policy has been tweaked slightly to increase the threshold up to $15,000 for officers to be able to procure on the basis of one written quote. That is part of our overall drive towards efficiency. You'll recall that we advised councillors last year of the introduction of a procurement card on a pilot project basis. That is currently being evaluated in its first 12 months, and we have seen uptake, pleasingly, of officers using the procurement card to reduce the time and effort in procuring products at low level value and high volume transactions without any reduction in probity or controls.
Thanks very much. Any further questions? Move to motions. We have an alt-rec which includes the CEO clause. Moved Councillor Voss, seconded Councillor Pearl. Councillor Voss? I think Dennis covered it really well. Councillor Pearl? No. Any others? Thanks very much for that. I will move to the vote. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Then there's 14.5, once again no speakers. Councillors' questions. This is the vacant facility at the rear of Betty Day Community Centre, proposal to invite lease office. Sounds like a sensible thing to do. Does anyone wish to move it? Oh, the hands. There's a forest of hands. I'll go Baxter and Bond. Move to the vote. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Right, I have to read something from my script. Urgent business. Councillors, thanks very much, those officers who are leaving. We have one item of urgent business, which is confidential, which relates to the Port Phillip Eco Centre. So I'm now going to close the meeting due to confidentiality, as there are no other members.
Point of order.
That's right, but I've been advised that I have a little script that I move. I have to. So there's no other items of urgent business, so I'm going to move straight into confidential mode.
Point of order.
Councillor Simic.
In relation to the confidential matters, had you read out? Sorry, were the items you read out in relation to the urgent business or confidential? Because the items under confidential are endorsement of customer experience and St Kilda Marina project, and you mentioned Eco Centre.
So it's all three. So it's the Port Phillip Eco Centre, which is Councillor Pearl's notice of motion. And notice of motions go traditionally before confidential items, but this is both a confidential item and a notice of motion. Urgent business.
Point of order.
Urgent business.
Just in relation to the Eco Centre, because that in that confidential meeting we'll have to first adopt and agree to an urgent item being raised.
Correct.
So I'm not sure that we mention it at this point, because it's not necessarily something that we'll discuss.
Yeah.
Through you, Mr Mayor, I was just pointing out previously that you've still got two general items, which are notices of motion and reports by councillor delegates, which you probably need to do first, which are items 15 and 16. Just to check there are no other notices of motion or reports by councillor delegates. In relation to councillor Simic's question, because it's an urgent business item which is confidential, you'd need to move into confidentiality to discuss the procedural motion first, to accept that it's in confidence and accept that it's urgent before the actual motion is determined or heard in confidence.
I got it wrong too. I read out my script incorrectly. We have to go to
Sorry,
notice
that's what
of
I was trying to
motions.
interrupt before. Just say I think we've still got two general items.
Yeah.
There.
So notice of motion. Councillors, we have no notices of motion. Reports by councillor delegates. Do we have any reports by councillor delegates? Okay. So that's agenda item 16. So agenda item 17 is urgent business. We have one item of urgent business, which is confidential. And so I plan to do it in this way. I first of all want to try and close the meeting due to confidentiality. Then I'll ask if for a motion about whether this is an urgent business item. I need a mover and seconder to accept an urgent business item. We then deal with the urgent business item if that is passed, and then secondly we go to two more confidential matters after that. So that's the order. I think that's okay.
That's correct.
So, okay. So, I want to say to you that as there are no other items on the agenda, I'll now call on a councillor to move that the meeting be closed to members of the public to consider both the urgent business and the two confidential items. So moved Councillor Brand, seconded Councillor Crawford. So you have, Councillor Brand has moved and Councillor Crawford has seconded a motion that the meeting be closed to members of the public in accordance with section 89(2)D and E of the Local Government Act 1989 as the items relate to contractual matters and a proposed development. I'll now put the motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. So first of all we're going to turn the feed off.